were you involved? Do you remember December 7th, 1941?
In that Sunday morning inferno, the Pacific Fleet appeared to be completely immobilized by the sneak attack. Nearly 3,000 casualties added to the catastrophe. Within hours, the United States declared war.
What do you remember about that?
13, I think, or something like that.
Right?
Pulling like crazy for there to be a war.
Yeah.
Uncharacteristic of my later years.
Gene, did you hear about it on the radio? Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The small Victrola tabletop radio. I remember enlisting 5 times, being turned down 5 times. My eyesight wasn't as good as was required. Now, why in the hell, being in the Navy would require you to have better eyesight than an infantryman or whatever, but that's the way it was. Eventually, I employed a method with the assistance of my mother, not my brother, a couple of other people, in which they would flash a card with 6 or 7 letters on it, like that.
Yeah.
And then down. And like anything else, you get skilled at if you do it often enough. And so I was able to do it forward and backward. The reason for that was in the processing center in Cleveland, enlistees and draftees eventually, but at that time enlistees, went through this maze. They got you down to your skivvies, and everything else was, including shoes and socks, was bare. It made it easier, I assume, for medical people to evaluate what your deficiencies might be. But as you came around one of these long barriers, screens, so to speak, to the eye chart, there was a guy there, and if you were wearing glasses, he'd say, kind of urgently, take off your glasses, so that you could not see the screen with adding whatever they add to lenses. Anyhow, I got good enough at that. They said read the top line or the bottom line or whatever, and I couldn't see the damn chart much, so let's read it. But I had a moment with those glasses that was like the flashcards my family was helping me with. And I said, LVGTC, CTL. Right. Okay.
Really?
So what year was that?
1943.
Wow, so you got in really young.
17.
The Navy or?
The Navy.
The Navy.
You first went to Cleveland, then you went to Great Lakes, but they didn't give you the eye test there.
Right.
Yeah. The other interesting part of that was I had heard about the conditioning program at boot camp. So in Hubbard, Ohio at that point, outside of Hubbard, Ohio was Harding Park. Harding Park had a long winding road to where the central playtime things were, and were tennis courts. So we played on the tennis court, but another buddy of mine from high school, we would start from at 10 o'clock in the morning to Harding Park and to the tennis courts, which in itself was like maybe 2.5 miles. We'd play tennis constantly all day long, and then come back in running to my house and take his house. So when they give you something they call a strength test, never could understand why that name, but you ran through a number of exercises, sprints, and other kinds of things. In a company of 185 men, I finished third. I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah.
12 weeks later, after going through their program, I was 125th. My program was stiffer than the other program.
Oh.
Went from Great Lakes to outside of Chicago, had what they called radio tech. And at that time they were just developing small radars that went on top of the twin quad 40 millimeter cannon guns. I was in a class with chemistry majors, math majors, etc. Guys that were 2 to 3 years older than me, maybe more than that, and they were all college graduates or close to that. So I seem to remember that when I took the physics course at Sherman High, we took about a week and a half or something to go through the electron theory and all of what that was. We're into this class, the first class, in about 15 minutes, and guys from the college education would say, come on, we know all that, okay, right? I'm lost from that point on, right? And finally, I actually intentionally flunked out. The regimen was terrible. You get up at 5:30 in the morning, you have a quick breakfast, you then have your first class until noon, you get another 45-minute break, you go all afternoon until evening, and after that, all those who are caught up by virtue of the scores that they have on their tests are ready. There are exceptions. Those people who are behind stay until 9 o'clock at night.
Wow.
That was 6 days a week.
Wow.
The 7th day, he rested. Anyhow, not a good thing. However, they then shipped me to Seattle, where I was there for about 6 months, and eventually then to Fort Lauderdale, where I was booked into a hotel, the largest hotel in Fort Lauderdale, soaring 3 stories. About room for maybe 50 men, and that was about it. Then I got on a ship and was in the North Atlantic. Never heard a shot fired in anger other than the depth charges that we were laying down.
Celebrations and all?
Oh God, yes.
Yeah.
I happened to be home with the same guy that I told you about playing tennis with. And we were sitting on my mother's porch when the news came about the atomic bomb being dropped, and the Japanese suing for surrender. So not a lot is going on in Hubbard. We hitchhike a ride. First person stops, takes us into downtown Youngstown, where a huge crowd is gathering, and we then begin to kiss every pretty woman or girl that's not good enough, and come away with a handkerchief full of lipstick marks entitled "The Battle of Youngstown."
many years were you in service?
2.5, I think.
Okay.
When the war ended, people had a certain number of points. And the longer you were in, and the greater kind of service that you had, all the count. So people who were in 2 years before I was, excuse me, were the first to be out as well. I found myself back at Great Lakes, and it seemed like a week. It may have been less than that. But you have nothing to do. There's no purpose in what you're doing, regardless of what that may look like. And you want to go home. Everybody wanted to go home. So they put me on a bus, and I arrived at 141 North Main Street, Hubbard, Ohio, with $1 in my pocket. Interesting times. Not to be repeated.
What did your mom and dad think of all this?
My dad died before I went in.
Okay.
And my mother did what all mothers do, or did at that point. Gasoline was rationed. I'm trying to think what kind of food was. It's not coming. And she called me when I was at Great Lakes, and we were trying to arrange for her to come to Chicago because a new play is being presented there, something called Oklahoma. You know, and the part that preceded that is she calls me, and I had never heard my mother's voice on a telephone before. And I never thought she had an accent, which she did. Born in what was then Czechoslovakia, and raised there amidst the mountains and all kinds of wonderful things. Anyhow, so I said, "Who is this?" And she said, "Bobby." What? And I must have talked to her for 10 minutes, still suspicious of who this woman was who had all this information about me.